Hi, welcome to Whiteboard Tutorials. My name is Russ McGuire. I'm the founder and chief strategist for SDG Strategy, and I'm your host today. Today's tutorial, we're going to be looking at situation assessment, situation analysis. We're going to be looking at what it takes to understand how the world is changing around you and how your organization's strengths and weaknesses factor into that. Now, this is a big topic. This is a topic that organizations often take weeks to really dig into and to understand. We're going to try to cover it in a fairly short amount of time. So stick with me as we go through this. So, situation assessment. Typically, we've used the term SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, to describe a situation assessment. And so I'm going to take you through it. I like to start with the opportunities and threats side. And for that, I like to use two different tools, two different kind of frameworks for thinking about how the world is changing. And again, we're going to go through this fairly quickly, but for your organization, you would probably want to dig into each of these areas. In any given area, like technology, which we'll talk about in a minute, for your industry, for your business, there may be technologies that you really want to dig into and understand. How are they developing? How are they going to impact your organization? How does that translate into opportunities and threats? And so you may have some very detailed research going on around 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different technologies. And so that could take some time. But we're just going to go almost top of mind here. I do have some notes, so when you see me kind of looking at my notes, know that I am cheating somewhat. I have done a little bit of research on this topic. But I'm going to take you through, and I'm going to do this specifically with my own business in mind to give you an idea of how an organization would actually do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce to you each of the tools, each of the frameworks that I think is very helpful in approaching this situation assessment, creating a SWOT view for your organization. And then I'm going to walk through, as I introduce one of those frameworks, then I'll walk through that one framework for my own organization, for my own company. So let's start with, again, we're starting with the opportunities and threats. And one of the great tools that I like to use is 6-segment analysis. So that's 6, the number 6, segment analysis. And so what we have here, let me choose a good color here to write with. I use purple for my writing. But what we have here is we have 6 different segments, 6 different kind of areas in which things can be changing fairly rapidly. I'm going to move to the other side so the shadow is out of the way. But you have demographic, you have sociocultural, you have political and legal, you have economic, you have technological, and you have global. So you need to think through for each of these. What I have here is 5 different columns, 5 different pieces of information that you want to draw out for each of those different segments. So for demographic, you'll identify what is the current state. Trends and disruptions. How is this kind of space changing? And then what are the uncertainties? What are the things that we don't know? The big questions that could swing things one way or another. And then out of that, out of these 3 fields, how does that translate into opportunities for our organization and threats to our organization and to our strategic plan? So I'm going to, again, this is a big matrix. We've got the 6 segments down the left-hand side. We've got current state, trends and disruptions, uncertainties, opportunities, and threats as the different columns. So I'm going to dig in, and I'm going to do this. The first 2 columns may have some level of similarity across many different industries, but when we get into the uncertainties and the opportunities and threats, you're going to be very focused on what it means specifically for your company and for your industry. So let me start filling this out. I'll go row by row for my organization. And for some of these areas, there may not be opportunities and threats that naturally follow. But I think you'll catch up with what I'm doing. It'll make sense to you pretty quickly. So when we think about the demographics, kind of what are the current demographics? My company is primarily focused in the U.S., so I would look at U.S. demographics. There's a lot we could say. In the U.S., the population is about 329 million people currently. We could break down demographics in terms of race. So about 53% are white. About 20% are Hispanic. About 13% are black. And I could continue on. We could look at age. So the median age in the US right now is about 38.2. And the life expectancy, it varies between men and women, but on average, it's about 78.6. So these are just kind of what's the current status of the demographics in the United States. I might want to choose, since my customers are more business customers, I might want to choose a different view of demographics. And I'm not going to go into that now, but I might look at kind of the mix of business and the nature of the age of businesses, the size of businesses, what the mix is between different businesses, what industry breakdowns there are. That might be a different way of thinking about demographics, the demographics of businesses as opposed to the demographics of people. But more broadly, we think of demographics in terms of the population. So then we move to the next column. What are the trends or disruptions that are happening? Hopefully there aren't going to be any huge disruptions from a demographic perspective. But the trends that we know about are millennials are now the largest portion of the population. They've passed baby boomers. That's a trend, and that's going to continue for a few more years. We know that the rate of marriage is declining, but there has been an uptick recently, which is a change in trend in babies being born, motherhood. So motherhood is increasing. Again, that doesn't really impact my business. If I looked at this from the nature of businesses, what industries are growing, or where is their growth in terms of the size of different types of businesses, that might be perhaps a little bit more interesting for me to look at. But I don't think any of those are really going to translate into opportunities and threats. So I'm just running through this in a fairly vanilla way, a way that this would apply to many different industries. So what are some uncertainties? Well, one is that birth rate. Is that birth rate? We're in a situation now where people are staying home. They're spending a lot more time at home. Is the birth rate going to have a little bit of a bump over the next 9 months or so? Maybe so. What about immigration? We've certainly seen over the last few years under the Trump administration that there's been much less immigration than we've seen in previous years. And so is that something that will continue, or is that going to be a change that we see? So that gives you a sense for kind of these first three columns of the current state, trends and disruptions, and then the uncertainties. Now again, for my business is a business consulting business. It's what we do is we help businesses, and so I don't think that any of these are necessarily driving great opportunities and threats within my industry and within my business. So I'm not going to call out at this point for this particular segment of analysis that there are any major opportunities or threats. But let me move on to sociocultural. And there's a lot of things we could say on sociocultural. Again, this is not an area that's necessarily going to make a big impact for me. It's a little hard in my mind to think about how to characterize the current state of the sociocultural world, but we can look at some trends that are happening. One of the major trends over the last couple of years has been the Me Too movement. Another trend has been kind of this, I'll call it gender fluidity. So certainly, major advances for the gay and lesbian community as well as the transgender community. And then there's also been, some level of public shaming of individuals and organizations that perhaps are out of line with the current sociocultural trends. And so I think those are trends that potentially are worth thinking about. There undoubtedly are others that you might want to pay attention to for your particular industry. Again, as a business consultant with primarily business customers, I'm not sure that there's a lot in this sociocultural element, the segment of sociocultural factors that's going to drive a lot of opportunities and threats for my business. So I don't think there's a lot of uncertainties. There are a lot of uncertainties about where culture is going, but I don't think there are any that are meaningful that are going to make an impact on my business. So for now, I'm just going to leave it at that. And let's move on to the next one, which is the political and legal segment of the analysis. And so clearly, the Trump administration has had pretty significant impacts on the political realm. So we've had, Trump policies have impacted, probably a number of different areas, but probably three that are worth calling out would be immigration, trade, and the regulatory space in general. So significant reduction in regulations and in regulatory activity. Trends and disruptions. I'm recording this in the spring of 2020, and in November of 2020, we're going to have a presidential election. So that will be potentially. That could be a disruptive event. We don't know yet, obviously. And with those will also be congressional elections, and so again, that could be impactful in terms of much of the political and legal environment. But what are the uncertainties that we have? Well, I think in general we can say that there are uncertainties around, are we going to have continuing deregulation, or are we going to have re-regulation? So tied most likely to these elections, will there be a significant shift in the nature of what's been a very deregulatory environment? Is that going to change? But another one, again, right now as I'm recording this, we're in the midst of the COVID-19 lockdown, and certainly there's already been a bit of buzz around wanting to hold China accountable, perhaps, for the way in which they managed the initial outbreak of this. So could we have some COVID-19 related sanctions on China? So I think that's a big question. Again, depending on what industry you're in, that may be a really big issue. And for other industries, I don't think it has a huge impact on my business at this point. So we've gone through 3 of the 6 different segments, and we haven't yet identified any opportunities or threats. I think that's about to change, so I wouldn't be too concerned. Let's continue on. Economic. Okay, so what is the current state of the economy? And I think entering 2020, the economy was in great shape. It was in its 12th year of expansion. We had unemployment at record lows. And we had the stock market at record highs. So that's what the current state was. And then COVID-19 came along. And so the known trends and disruptions include COVID-19 shutdowns of basically almost every industry. And that is expected, fully expected, to cause a major recession. So that's a big deal. Unemployment right now is at record highs, just an incredible number of filings for unemployment. And so, it's been a truly disruptive event from an economic perspective. And that is going to shape our environment going forward. So the biggest uncertainty is how quickly can the economy recover? We don't know, Hopefully quickly, but we will have to wait and see. So how does this translate into opportunities and threats for my business, SDG Strategy? Well, the first thing that I would observe is that in this environment where every industry has been shut down and now is going to have to restart with a different environment all around, every organization needs strategic planning. That is an opportunity. If that's what I do, if I help people with strategic planning, then all of that creates an opportunity. So I put it in the opportunities column. So every organization needs strategic planning. Now, every organization always needs strategic planning, but the type of strategic planning, the kind of start from scratch, almost strategic planning that's necessary now, is something new, something that is out of the comfort zone of most leaders and most organizations. The second thing that I think comes out of this that plays into an opportunity for my business is that businesses are going to be much more cost conscious in this recessionary environment, in an environment where there's been a huge cash crunch on virtually every organization. Then every dollar counts even more than it ever does. So again, I'm putting that under opportunities. That's a challenge for most organizations. But given the nature of my business, my services are significantly less expensive than the traditional management consulting. And so I'm going to capture that as an opportunity. So businesses more cost conscious. So that's an opportunity. But there's a flip side of that, and it's a good and a bad. And so the good is that they're going to be more focused on low-cost options. But the bad is they have less money to spend. So I'm going to put that under the threats. So businesses, and I'd say nonprofits as much or more so even, have less to spend on consulting. And then the second thing that I think we need to recognize as a threat coming out of this economic environment is that lots of people have already been laid off. Unfortunately, more people are going to be laid off. And a lot of those people are really smart. And some of them are strategists, and they're good at doing business strategy. I'd like to think that I'm as good as any, but some of those layoffs may translate into the creation of new competitors. If someone is laid off as a strategist and is really good at it, they might say, I'm just going to open up my new firm. I'm going to go help other companies with their strategy. They need help. And so they may become a competitor to me. So layoffs may create new competitors. So here we've got a full row to give us a picture of kind of what this whole process looks like. So in the economic realm, we've got a situation that has been very, very positive. We've had this disruptive event with this COVID-19 pandemic and really the economic crisis that has caused. There are some uncertainties. How quickly is the economy going to recover? That translates into some opportunities. Everybody needs a new strategic plan, a bottoms-up strategic plan. They need help with that. They're very cost conscious, and I'm very cost effective. SDG Strategy is very cost effective. That's the opportunity space. The threat space is that they just have less money to spend. They're less likely to be anxious, to be wanting to spend money on consulting. And lots of smart people are getting laid off, and some of them may become competitors to me. That's one complete row. Let's continue on. On the technological segment, what we have is, we have the kind of the current state is that internet and wireless and the Internet of Things, they really have transformed our lives and our businesses. So I'll put internet, wireless, and IoT for Internet of Things have been transformative. That's the current state. That's kind of how things are from a steady state perspective. But again, we've had this disruptive event. And so the shutdown orders that have really kind of caused businesses to have to rethink the way they operate, it's forced organizations to adopt work from home and virtual meetings like they never have before. And again, in this, the technology space is one space where, again, it makes a lot of sense for you to look at the technologies that are most impactful on your industry. This, I think, is a technology space that's very impactful on my industry and on the services that I offer. So I'm capturing it here. Shutdown or lockdown orders have forced organizations to adopt work from home and virtual meetings. And if you're watching this on YouTube and you're having trouble reading my chicken scratch handwriting, I'll tell you, I'm also posting this video inside of a page at clearpurpose.media. And if you go to that page and you look under tutorials, you should find this tutorial. And I have in nice, easy to read, computer generated forms, everything that I'm sharing with you and writing on the whiteboard. So if you're having trouble reading it, you want to see what I actually wrote out, I suggest you go there and you find this tutorial, and you'll find in the page, along with the video, the actual tables and diagrams that we're going to be using. Okay, so technology, very impactful. We've already had this transformative impact of internet and wireless and Internet of Things. Now we've had this disruption of these lockdown orders, and now companies are starting to adopt these technologies in new ways. So a critical question, I think, is, what's going to change once these lockdown orders are lifted? And so, for example, we might ask, will workers return to the office? For my business, that could be a big deal. Are we going to be doing virtual work increasingly? I'd like that. I think that would help me be able to serve many more companies without having to travel, and therefore being much more efficient in my time and my use of time, being able to help more people in more ways. And technology is an area that I'm very comfortable with. I've been working with technology in the midst of developing these technologies for 30 plus years. And so it's a very comfortable space. And so that translates into an opportunity, which is virtual consulting may be accepted. Today, people like for me to show up on site and do consulting, and that's great. I'm happy to do that. But I think that if we can get the virtual model to work, it can be much more efficient, it can be much more cost effective, which kind of plays into the realities that we talked about above. And then I think the second opportunity is that the technology strengths that we have within SDG Strategy that I have the experience with over these multiple decades will really come into play and potentially can be very much appreciated. So SDGs, tech strengths may be highly valued. And then, what are the threats? The threats are that virtual consulting may actually become a commodity. If we have lots of smart people out there, if anyone anywhere in the world can provide consulting services to anyone else anywhere in the world, then it may become a very highly competitive, very, very price-driven environment where lots of people are fighting for the consulting business because they all can provide it no matter where it is, and they might be competing on price. And so that is a threat. Again, we have a second complete row here that calls out some opportunities and threats that I think we need to pay attention to. And then the last segment that we need to look at is the global segment. And so kind of what is the current state? Well, the economy had become highly globalized. Manufacturing and services were regularly kind of crossing borders, not constrained within a given country. Now, in the U.S., President Trump's trade policies had some impact, some reduction in that cross-border flow of money and services and products. But in general, it was a very highly globalized world. And so I'll just put economy highly globalized. And what has happened from a trends and disruptions perspective? Well, right now, everything is shut down. There's very little travel. There's still shipment of goods, but even that is somewhat impacted by this pandemic and the fallout from that. So the entire global economy impacted by COVID-19. Some of that is that cross-border piece, and some of it is just the reality that every country in the world is impacted by this pandemic. And industries across the world are completely shutting down. And it's going to take time for those kind of value chains and supply chains to ramp back up, and for all of that to be playing out and kind of feeding into our businesses, both on the supply side as well as on the demand side. So what about uncertainties? Well, I think one of the big uncertainties is whether manufacturing and services activities, and with that kind of infrastructure and jobs, whether that, which has moved out of the U.S., how much of that is going to come back to the U.S. because of what we've had to deal with this COVID-19 crisis. There have been calls for certain industries, pharmaceuticals, for example, to bring back to the U.S. the ability to manufacture certain types of products that right now we're just perhaps overly reliant on other countries, and especially on China. So, will manufacturing and service, jobs and infrastructure return to the U.S.? So that's a good picture of the global environment. Does that create any opportunities or threats for my business? I don't think that it does. I think that it certainly will play out as I do consulting work for people in different industries, that this will be a critical element of the discussion that we have as they're doing strategic planning. But I don't think it's a critical element of my own business. If I were very focused on doing consulting in other parts of the world, then it certainly would. but I'm primarily focused on the US. Okay, so I've given you one picture which is around these 6 different segments, 6 different environmental segments. That's one tool. And so I'm going to erase this whiteboard so we have space to do the next one. But I'm going to keep the grid here because the grid is going to be used again, but using 5 different factors rather than these 6 segment factors. So let me erase it, and then I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, stop the video so you don't have to watch me erase the board, and then we'll start it again. Okay, well I'm back. I've cleaned the whiteboard and I'm ready to start again. We're going to use a different tool this time to do the same type of analysis, almost identical analysis. But instead of looking at those 6 segments that kind of look at the world around us, we're going to look a little bit more specifically at our particular industry. And so we're going to use a tool as a starting point, or as kind of the foundation for the framework, a tool called the 5 forces model. Michael Porter, strategist, famous strategist at Harvard, he developed this, I think it was in the late 70s or early 80s, a model that says that there are really 5 forces that impact the profitability of any given industry. And so those 5 forces are the threat of new entrants. How likely is it that new competitors will enter the industry? The power of suppliers. Do suppliers have a lot of power over the value chain, and therefore they can charge high prices and they can put pressure on those within the industry? And then on the other side, buyers. What's the power of buyers? Do they have a lot of power over the suppliers, the players within the industry? And therefore, can they force prices low and otherwise force the participants in the industry to operate in ways that make it difficult to be profitable and be successful? And then substitutes. Are there substitutes? Does the customer have to buy the product that this industry produces? Or do they have other options, other ways that they can do it? And then the last one is rivalry. So this is looking inside the industry itself. How fierce is the rivalry within the industry? Are there a lot of competitors that are having to very fiercely compete with each other and therefore likely driving down prices and driving up the activities, the services, the value that needs to be provided as part of the product or service being delivered within the industry? So those 5 forces are used by Michael Porter to talk about the profitability of industries. That's not how we're going to use it today. We're going to talk about these 5 different kind of players or realities that industries have to face and ask the same questions of what's the current situation, how is that changing, either in trends or disruptions, what are the uncertainties that we have, and how do those translate into opportunities and threats? And I'm going to do this in a much more rapid fashion than we did the last one because I think that you have a sense of how it works from having done it with the 6 segment analysis. So I'm not going to fill out every single box here. I'm not even going to go through every single row because they aren't necessarily going to be impactful on the exercise that we're doing. But again, if you were doing this in person, we've spent about half an hour so far in going through this. In reality, you'd spend days at least, probably weeks, in developing this view, this understanding of the opportunities and threats. So we're doing it very rapidly. I'm going to take a few shortcuts just because I want you to understand the approach, how to do it, and not necessarily do it with the rigor that we would do it in an actual situation assessment exercise. So the first question is on new entrants, and so in the current state, there's in the consulting world, so we're now talking about management consulting as the industry. I don't think that there's like a flood of new entrants coming in. There are always people that are hanging up their shingle and saying, "I'm now a consultant," but it's not a large portion. But what we see with the trends and disruptions, as we talked about on the last chart, is that layoffs may encourage previously employed to pursue consulting as a line of business. So we've got, I'll put it as layoffs feeding launch of consultancies. Okay, and then does that translate into any opportunities for us? Well, not really. Does it translate into threats? Yes. So laid off strategists may form new competitive consulting firms. So the threat is very similar to what we captured on the last chart, so that's not a bad thing. New competing firms. Okay, so now if we look at the supplier side, well, in my business, there aren't a lot of suppliers. I need good internet connectivity. I need hosting for my content. I need some hosting for the different online tools that I offer. But there's not a big supplier. It's not like I'm manufacturing something and I'm dependent on having titanium or computer chips or something that is going to face a lot of pressure from suppliers. So at least for now, for our exercise, for this tutorial, I'm going to skip the suppliers row. And I'm going to move on instead to the buyers row. And so, the current reality is that the buyers do need to be doing strategic planning. They always have and they always will. Right now it's a little bit higher. It's quite a bit higher actually, because of the fact that there's been such disruption across all industries. But it's always true, and I think it always will be true. So what's the disruption? What's the trend or the disruption that's going to change that or have an impact on that? And I think that one thing is that most likely consulting budgets are going to be constrained. So does that create any uncertainties, anything that we aren't sure about? Yeah, there's uncertainty about how constrained they'll be and how quickly the economy recover and all of that. But I don't think that those are really the focus. At this point, we just know that there is a change, and that's going to drive some opportunities and threats for us. So, what are the opportunities? I like to describe my approach to consulting as being a catalyst. A typical consulting approach, as a consultant, you show up with a small army of people to do all of the work, to do all of the strategy development. They have to learn the business first. They have to engage with the business and take time from the management team to understand all aspects of the business. But then they go off and do the work and they apply their methodologies, and they're very good at it. But it takes a lot of time and it costs a lot of money. My approach is the catalyst approach, and it's not that I'm going to do the work, but I'm going to accelerate the work. I'm going to enable you to more effectively do the work. So you have people that already understand the business. You have smart people within your organization that are actually capable of doing this if they just had a little bit of help. And so my model is to come in and be that catalyst, to be able to help you, to guide you, to mentor you, to provide the tools, to provide the framework, to explain the steps that need to be followed, perhaps to manage that process. But really, because I'm bringing very little in terms of resources to the table, and you already understand your business, we can do it much quicker at a dramatically lower price, a small fraction of the price of if you hired a typical consulting firm. So in this environment, with this change within the buyer's environment, then I think the catalyst model may be very attractive. That's great. Of course, is there a threat here? Well, of course there's a threat. There may be reluctance to hire outside help at all. Okay, so that generates some opportunities and threats. And these again are, somewhat similar to what we saw in the last table that we filled in. That's fine, that's good. That's kind of affirming and confirming what we found before. So now if we move on to the question of substitutes. What's the substitute for hiring a consultant or hiring a catalyst? Well, the real substitute is do it yourself. DIY. That's always been the substitute. Companies can do all of this without any help. It can be hard, it can be challenging, it can not work very well because the people doing it, it's not what they do every day for their job, or it's outside their comfort zone, or they don't have the experience or the tools or the methodologies. But it's always an option. And certainly lots of companies go out and hire their own people to play that role internally, and that's great, that's fine. So, so that is the current state, always has been and always will be. What is the disruption or the trend here? Well, I think that we may be introducing the disruption right here as I record this tutorial. Through clearpurpose.media, I'm making lots of content available to help people to do their own strategic planning. Right now, there's so much need for it that I want to help people. And so this tutorial may be all that you need to be able to go and do your own situation assessment without any help from me. And if I can help you in that way, I am thrilled, and that is great. So, clear purpose media may enable more DIY. And if I can create value in that way, that's a wonderful thing. So I think that may be a disruption here. Clearpurpose.media or something like it hasn't really been available, and so I'm thrilled to be able to provide that. Okay, so again, uncertainties. We are running into a lot of uncertainties at this point in our process on this chart. We probably could if we spent more time on it, but I want to kind of get to the heart of it. So does that create an opportunity? What we see here around the substitutes, the DIYers. And the reality is I think it does. I think that clearpurpose.media creates awareness of and drives business to SDG. My hope is that you watching that this helps you. But some of you watching it are going to say, you know what, now I kind of have an idea of what we're trying to do. I don't think I can do it. I need some help. And if you need help, I'm here to help. So contact me. My email is russ@sdgstrategy.com. I'd love to talk to you. If we can do a quick phone call and I can help you through it and you're off and running, that's great. If you need more help from me, I'm certainly happy to provide it. But that's an opportunity. I think that this clear purpose creates awareness of and drives business to SDG Strategy. By the way, you can see at the top of the whiteboard here, we do have our URLs, sdgstrategy.com. If you want to know more about me and about SDG and what we do, then that's the place to go. Clearpurpose.media is our site for free content. We've got a lot of written material. We talk about it in terms of tools and tales and tutorials and books. And so this is a tutorial. We also share the experiences that we've had with working with different organizations, so you get a sense for what it really looks like. And then the tools, we share tools like this, other tools that we use in helping people develop strategy. We're helping explain what those are and how to use them. And then we also have little book reviews. Lots of books out there on strategy. A lot of them are good, but you have to know when to use them and how to use them. And so that's really what we're focused on with our book reviews. Okay, so clear purpose is creating awareness of and hopefully drives business to us. But the threat is that clear purpose, may make us unnecessary. It may enable potential clients to not need help. And you know what? I'm okay with that. If I can help you in any way, then I'm thrilled. I've accomplished my mission, which is to help people develop sound strategy, help leaders develop sound strategies. Okay, so moving on to the last one of the 5 forces, the 5 players here. It's rivals. It's the other kind of consulting organizations that are out there. I think of them really in 2 buckets. It's a little bit more not quite cut and dried like that. There's a little bit more complexity to it. But I would say traditional management consulting firms and boutique consultants. So they've been around. They've probably been growing these last few years when there's been a lot of money spent as the economy's been strong. And then the disruption that we're facing is, again, the constrained consulting budgets are likely to pressure these traditional firms. Especially when I think of the traditional management consulting companies, the big names that are out there, typically they'll start their small projects, are 3-month-long projects costing $250,000, $500,000. And a lot of companies that have had that kind of money to spend on consulting aren't going to have that kind of money in the near term. So I think that's a disruptive factor within the industry. So then the key uncertainty here, and we could have done this probably for the rest, but just to at least fill in one box in this column, is what is the level of that constriction? So how tight are consulting budgets really going to get? Don't know. I think we'll find out as we start engaging with clients to find out how their budgets have changed. So what's the impact going to be on these consulting firms? I think that they're going to have layoffs too. And so I think that the layoffs of management consultants are also potentially going to create new competitors for us. So again, it's very similar to that one. Laid off consultants. May become new competitors. So if we go back and we kind of summarize all the opportunities and threats that we had on the last chart and on this chart, what I would say is that there's really the opportunity that we have here, which is that our low-cost model may become very attractive in this environment in which the economy is challenged. I think that we also have the threat here of new entrants, which shows up in a couple places on this chart. And we also have the threat of the fact that budgets are constrained, and so there's a reluctance to spend a lot of money with outside consultants. From the last chart, I think some of the opportunities that we had there that we didn't capture here, so I'll write them down so we've got them all in one place, is that everyone does need I'll call it strong strategic planning right now. It's largely starting from scratch. It's saying we understand why we exist, but how we deliver that, we probably need to rethink all over again. And then the other opportunity that I think is important to call out from that first one is that virtual consulting, I think, is a very real opportunity. and our strengths with technology really play into that. So I'll just write it as virtual consulting. Okay, so I like to have the top three opportunities and the top three threats really clearly identified, and I think that's what we have here. So on the opportunity side, we've got everyone needs strong strategic planning right now, and that's out of the comfort zone for most organizations and most leaders. They're very cost sensitive, and so our Catalyst model might be a great fit, might really fit well. And there's this opportunity to do virtual consulting as opposed to in-person consulting, and our background and our skills is a particularly strong fit for that. On the threat side, we've got the potential new entrants. We've got the people who've been laid off, either strategists, smart people within companies that are downsizing, or specifically those consultants coming out of other consulting firms that are now, smaller consulting firms may actually be going out of business. Larger consulting firms may be reducing their headcount. And so that is a threat in terms of those people might hang up their shingle and say, I'm now a management consulting, I'm a consultant, and I'm out there competing with Russ. That might drive to a commoditized market, which I didn't capture here, but it was on our last slide, and I think it plays right into that. There is this budget constraint, means that companies may be very reluctant to really hire any outside help at all. And when they do, they may have less money to spend on it, which could play to our strengths, but it's still a threat. And I guess I've got two there. I think the third one that is worth calling out, I'll put it here, is virtual consulting may be commoditized. So we've got our three opportunities and our three threats. This one was just a repeat of that one. So that's taken us through the external side. We've spent almost an hour and we've gotten only halfway through the exercise, but I think we need to continue on. So I'm going to take a pause here. I'm going to clear the whiteboard again, and we'll start over with the internal side. Okay, I'm back. I've cleared off the whiteboard. I've started another new chart. This chart is called a strategy canvas, and it comes from, let me grab it. It comes from the book Blue Ocean Strategy. It's a great book. You might want to check it out if you've got some time. It's very thought-provoking and helps you think about your industry and the way to compete in your industry, probably in a different way. But again, this is a tool that I'm using in a different way than really the tool was designed. But I think it's incredibly helpful for helping you understand what your strengths and weaknesses are, especially relevant to the opportunities and threats that we've just identified. So the way that this canvas lays out is there's a vertical axis and there's a horizontal axis. And so the vertical axis is labeled low to high. And high isn't necessarily better than low. It depends on what you're talking about. So for example, across the bottom, we have the different dimensions of competition. So I've tried to lay out dimensions that I think are meaningful for my industry, which is business consulting. And for your industry, it'll be different. So there are different things that kind of drive customers or prospects to evaluate your business and say, you're really strong in that, and I'm going to value that. Or others are stronger than you. That's a challenge for you. And so I'm not going to value it with you, but I'll value it with them. So for example, total cost is the first element of competition that we have here on this chart for the consulting industry. Everyone cares about cost or price. And so high, in that case, would be a high price. That's not good. Low price is what customers are looking for. If what they're getting is good, they want to pay as little as possible for it. So the different elements that we have across here, the second is team member experience. That's one where high would be better. So again, you aren't necessarily looking for the one that is the highest on the chart, but you need to understand each element, and that might translate. Sometimes a low will be a strength, and sometimes a high will be a strength. The third element is quality deliverables. What you get, is that something that's very useful in your business? Is it easy to understand, easy to communicate, easy to share, clear, crisp, and something that you can go and execute against? The fourth is team size. And again, high and low here may depend. You might want a big team showing up so that your team has less work to do. Or you might prefer a small team so that your team is very much engaged. Depends on your particular situation as a customer of business consulting. So again, this may not be necessarily a strength or a weakness, but it's just something that differentiates the firms in the industry. Domain expertise, clearly you want to be high. So it's strong if it's a high. How much expertise does the firm bring in the specific domain where the consulting is being done? Tools and methodologies. How strong are the tools and methodologies to really bring structure and discipline to the process, the project that's being done? Partner engagement. Is the partner from the firm, are they only involved on the front end in closing the sale and then you never see them again? Or are they involved in every aspect of the work? Knowledge transfer. Is the consulting firm really interested in making sure that you learn how to do this so that you can do it yourself in the future? Or is the firm really focused on you not learning and you continuing to be dependent on them so that they can have the same engagement over and over and over again with you? And then the last is flexibility. How flexible is the organization in the way that it works with you? And I think that for all of us, we'd like to work with people that can be flexible in working with us. So again, high would be a strength in that case. So I do want to look at the two types of consultants I called out on the last table that we did. So you've got kind of the traditional big management consulting firms, and then you've got the boutique consultants. And then I want to add in my firm as well, SDG Strategy, as I go through this exercise for my own business. And so for you, if you were doing this for your industry and for your business, you would identify what are some different categories of competitors that you go against, kind of lump them together. It might make sense if there's a really big competitor that they would have their own kind of line through this chart that we're going to draw. But most of the time you'll be looking for kind of groups of competitors that would all have generally the same type of performance against these criteria. And then you want to see, how do you line up? Where by doing this, we'll see where your strengths are and where your challenges are. So I'm going to take green for the management consultants because they cost a lot of money, and so I'll give them the green one. And so let me start with them. And so from a cost perspective, I would say that they are way up here. They're the highest cost option. From a team member experience perspective, they'll have team members that are very experienced, and they'll have other team members that really are learning on the job. And you're helping train them in your industry, and they'll also be learning kind of the process as we go. So I'll put that kind of down here. And then as we move on to the quality of deliverables, I think that they deliver very high quality deliverables. They have, most of them have teams that are the ones producing these wonderful decks with beautiful diagrams that are easy to use and very focused on how do you move forward and execute against that. Okay, team size, they will bring in a huge team. They'll bring in an army of consultants. Now as we move on to kind of the domain expertise, I think that really kind of fits in the middle of the pack. So it's probably around here, where the reality is that across their firm, they have domain experts, and they can tap into those experts. For your the people assigned to your particular company, they can reach out and they can find those experts, but the individuals that are assigned to your company may not necessarily have that domain expertise themselves, but they still have a lot that is available to them. Tools and methodologies. Again, that's a real strength of these big management consulting firms. And then in terms of partner engagement, I think that this is actually pretty low for them. So a lot of times you'll have kind of a vice president who's involved in the sale, and you gain a lot of confidence in what the vice president can do for you, and then the vice president's gone, and they'll have a partner. His title will be partner, but he's the one who's actually there kind of managing everything, and then a lot of the work is being done by the very young and less experienced but very smart team members that are part of that team. And then from a knowledge transfer perspective, this really is low. I've worked with a lot of these firms on the client side, and it's what we referred to as the cockroach model. They want to get in and never have to leave. They may scurry and hide out of sight for a while, but they're always looking for that next engagement. And if you're able to do it yourself, then that kind of takes away that future opportunity. Then as far as flexibility, I think that they have their way of working, and their model is long engagements that are expensive with lots of people brought in, and they aren't necessarily, give them some credit that they can, they do have enough people that they can do a lot of different things, but they generally are going to work for their model. And then in the strategy canvas model, what you do is you draw a line. The line isn't really all that meaningful, but it helps you kind of see where things are changing. Between the different dimensions of competition. So next I'll go to, I'll use red, that'll stand out. I'll use red for the boutique consultants. They're bright lights. I like the boutique consultants. They have a lot of energy and a lot of passion and a lot of smarts in their particular area of focus. But their cost is certainly much less than what we have for the management consultants. I'd kind of put it kind of in the middle. Give them a circle. And so that's good. Their team member experience is certainly better than the management consultants. But on average, it's not going to be, decades of experience. And then, the quality of their deliverables is probably the lowest of what we'll look at. They're obviously doing good work, and their hearts are in the right place, but sometimes they may not have all the capabilities for generating great outputs that are easy to understand and easy to execute. From a team size perspective, they're also relatively low, so they'll bring in a handful of people. Often, maybe 2 or 3, maybe 5, maybe half a dozen for a particular engagement. And then from a domain expertise perspective, that's where they really shine. Typically you're going to hire a boutique consulting firm because they're expert in your industry, or they're expert at doing a particular type of project. And so they are way up here on domain expertise. And then as far as tools and methodology, again, that's not something that they necessarily are going to have a lot of strength at. In maybe 1 or 2 areas they will, but not a breadth of tools and methodologies for doing a variety of different activities. So I'll give them some credit, because in their domain, they'll probably have great tools and methodologies, but beyond their domain, it'll be somewhat limited. For partner engagement, this is going to be pretty high. It may not, it certainly will be much higher than for the big consulting firms. Knowledge transfer, again, this is not really their focus. They aren't as good at not doing it as the big consulting firms, but they want the repeat engagements. They want to come back and do it again for you next year, because they're not exactly a one-trick pony, but they're a limited number of trick ponies, and so every year they want to be back doing the same work. But they are certainly much more flexible than the management consulting firms. So again, connecting the dots, very different picture than the big management consulting firms. In some places they've got similar strengths and similar challenges or weaknesses, but in a lot of ways very different. So then last I want to do, I should label these. So big management consultants, boutique consultants, and last but not least, SDG Strategy. So our catalyst model means that we will be the lowest total cost. Oops, not a circle, I'm a triangle. From a team member experience perspective, we are the highest. I'm a one-man shop with decades of experience. My average is much higher than either of the other guys. Quality deliverables, I think that we're good. You know, we aren't perhaps quite as good as the management consultants because we don't have an army of people developing slides, PowerPoint slides with beautiful graphs, but the tools that we use generate very clear, cohesive, direction-giving outputs, readouts, that then you can go execute. From a team size perspective, I may bring in some friends if necessary, but for almost every engagement, it's going to be me, and I'm going to be the one driving it. Domain expertise, you know, depending on what we're talking about, it's probably going to be relatively low. So if we're talking about telecom or mobile, it's going to be incredibly high. If we're talking about very, you know, the strategic planning exercises, it'll be high, but may not be deep expertise within your industry. Okay, and then tools and methodologies, here I think we're very high. So again, over the decades, working with a variety of different organizations, we have compiled a set of tools and methodologies that I think are incredibly helpful and valuable in strategic planning. Partner engagement, very high. I'm the guy. I'm the guy who you'll talk to on the front end as we're discussing the engagement, and I'm the guy who will be there every step of the way with you. Knowledge transfer. I want you to learn this. I hope to continue providing value to you in some way, but I don't want you to have to pay multiple times for the same thing. And then flexibility. I'm very flexible. You know, how do you want to work? What works best for you? Let's figure that out. And you know, I think that my tools and methodologies will fit in well, but we can flex them to make sense for what makes sense for your organization. So to wrap this up, we've been talking for a long time. Let me maybe I'll use blue to call out the strengths and weaknesses, or strengths and challenges, that I think then play into to finish out this situation assessment. And so the strengths are total cost, team member experience, tools and methodologies, a focus on knowledge transfer, and flexibility. So I've outlined 5 strengths. I probably would want to work to boil that down, to kind of synthesize that down to probably 3 that I would be really focused on communicating. and making sure that I'm leveraging those as I'm trying to identify the things where I can be of greatest value to clients. And then what are the challenges? Well, clearly, team size is a challenge. If there's a type of engagement that requires an army of people to show up, I'm not going to be the right choice for that, and I shouldn't be trying to convince you that I am. I think that domain expertise is also a weakness and a challenge, and so I need to focus on those opportunities where really my strength in strategic planning is going to really stand out, and the nature of who I am and the character traits that I bring to the table, where that's a very strong fit for the organization, then I think that's where I need to focus as well. But if you're looking for someone who's an expert in construction or an expert in mining or manufacturing, then that's not going to be me. Hopefully I can still be the right choice for some engagements, but for others, it's not going to be me. Then let's see, are there any other weaknesses that really jump out? And I don't think that there are. So I think that, again, I probably would want to try to identify a third one. I like to have 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses or 3 challenges as I'm laying out this situation assessment. But hopefully by going through this, I've given you a sense for how you can approach this very challenging topic of how do I do an external situation assessment? What does that even look like? And how do I do an internal situation assessment? How do I approach that, and what does that look like? So with that, I will wrap up this whiteboard tutorial. I hope it's been helpful to you. I hope that it has given you all the information you need so you can go forth and do it. If not, if you have any questions or if you think you need some help, feel free to reach out. Again, my email address is russ, R-U-S-S, at sdgstrategy.com. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.